Welcome to Prepping for the Studio. If you're a musician or musical artist that wants to learn more about what goes on, how to prepare, or how to make the most out of your studio session, you're in the right place. Hello, and welcome back to Prepping for the Studio, the podcast for musicians who want to know more about the studio, what goes on, and how to prepare to make the most out of their time and money. I am Roy Silverstein, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brian Scheuble.
Hello. It's warm. Hot.
Another hot day here in San Diego as we record this at Rarefied Recording, my studio. Wow. I don't know what to say. It's March something, and it's really hot. But we're joined by another Brian today, Brian Witkin. How you doing, Brian?
Very good. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Roy.
You're welcome.
Hey, Brian.
The Brians meet.
Yes, we meet.
That's right. Brian, you are an entertainment lawyer. You are a label owner of Pacific Records, right?
That's right.
Musician yourself?
Musician first. Yeah, I grew up, surrounded by musicians and music. So creator first.
Yes. And the reason why I'm having you on here today is to talk about kind of more of the business side of things, since you're well-versed in all that, being not only a lawyer, but running a label. And we want to kind of fill in the gaps of my knowledge and educate our audience out there more about maybe prepping for a release, let's call it. Because obviously we've talked a lot about prepping for the studio and going in to record and all that kind of fun, creative stuff. But there is a business side to the music business. And if you're hoping to make this more than just a hobby, then having your ducks in a row there is going to really make a big difference, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you nailed it when you said, this is a business. So if you're a musician or a songwriter, a composer, a performing artist, whatever you're doing, if you're doing it professionally to make a living, you are a business, whether you like it or not. So, having a team in place and at least knowledge of the basics so you're able to, manage the team, I'd say is like a starting point. But we can get to that a little bit later. Since you talked about just having a plan generally,
Yes.
for sure. And I'd say there's sort of two sides of that. Of course, just like you prepare to go into a studio session. So you're frosty, if you're playing with the band, you want to make sure that, you're all rehearsed and ready to go in. Same thing with like your paperwork and your back end. So, like if you're, for example, a songwriter and you're recording original music, you want to make sure that if you've already written your music, that you have, those songs registered with your PRO. So like the two big ones, BMI and ASCAP, you want to make sure your ducks are in a row there.
Let's discuss that a little further. So what is a PRO? What do they do for you?
Yeah, great question. So in a nutshell, a PRO, it stands for Performing Rights Organization, and their job is to collect money on the artist's behalf, the songwriter's behalf, for public performances. So in our markets, usually the biggest thing would be like radio, things like that. But there's also like back end if you have sync and, public broadcasting, things of that nature. But a PRO, their job is to get you paid as a songwriter. And, it's really important that you register with one. The costs are nominal for BMI and ASCAP. I think when I did it, BMI was even free to register as a songwriter. It might still be. ASCAP is not a lot either. And there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah.
You can really research on your own.
What's your like high-end view of like why you might go with BMI versus ASCAP?
It just, BMI has been around a little longer. I have heard, and, don't quote me on this. Oh, and let me back up for a minute. I should have said this when I started. While I happen to be a music and film attorney, I'm not giving legal advice today. And please do not rely on anything that I say. Make sure you, consult whoever your expert is for anything. And, we're just having a conversation here. I'm not giving anyone legal advice.
100%.
But yeah, that being said, big picture, I don't really have a preference. I myself am a BMI writer, but I have a lot of friends and co-writers that are ASCAP. I have heard that ASCAP may be a little bit more aggressive about, collecting certain things. And I've found, since I have publishers at both, that I get a lot more emails from ASCAP with like events and things happening around. So like if you're into that and networking, maybe there's a slight advantage there, but I can't really weigh in because I'm not educated since I've only been with BMI, but I'm happy with their service. And, but definitely if you're a songwriter, you can register it. It's close to nothing or free depending on who you go with. And you just, that's like a threshold requirement for being a songwriter is you want to be represented. And unlike a publisher where, you might need to like have a certain amount of like credits or credibility first. Registering just as a songwriter with PRO, anyone who just declares that they're a songwriter can do it.
Okay, so that's easy enough and
Yes.
something you should definitely do.
And another thing, so I mentioned the songwriting, right? But a lot of times, and I even had this recently with a international artist that came here to write and record an album. Sometimes you're writing songs in the studio, and it's okay if you're gonna write and then record. You don't have to necessarily register them up front. I would say just as soon as you know. But that brings me to my second really important point is split sheets.
Okay.
So like, let's say the three of us write a song.
Right.
I can't even register it at BMI for my portion or until we have a conversation about like, okay, well, what's the split? What are we doing? And, there's a lot of different ways that artists can sort of agree or not agree to do things. The default is everyone's equal. So for example, if the three of us just co-write a tune and we don't discuss it, just, I own half of what you did and, you own half of what I did, or again, where I just gave a 3 example. I'm bad at math. That's why I'm aware. But we each own a third of each other's contributions, right? So I'm a big fan of talking to people. And I think just as a music attorney, one of the things that I have just seen time and time again is just talk to people. It is so easy to just have a conversation either before, during, or after, but before anything happens. So perfect world, you have that conversation before you go into the studio, you talk about how it might work. And the two most common ways for splits, and maybe I should back up, but what a split is when you write a song with another. That's called a co-write. So there's at least yourself and one other writer. That's a co-writing situation. And typically how you divide the copyright for what you've created, which is a work of performing arts. It's like the PA copyright is what they call it. Who owns what, in other words.
Okay.
And you got to have that conversation. And again, the default's 50-50 if there's two people. And, again, it's just divided equally. But, let's say, for example, you're the primary writer and you pretty much did everything and just one person changes one little note or gives one little lyric.
Right.
That's actually a contribution and they still have 50. So sometimes you might want to talk about that.
Yeah. That doesn't seem fair in that case.
Right, exactly. So maybe it's not. So you should either talk about that during or after the fact once you're done. I actually personally take the approach that when I have a co-writing situation with like a partner, so let's say I'm like bandmates or anything, just to keep it simple and sort of to spark creativity and energy, I just say if we're in a room, if we're contributing, it's all equal. I don't care about if you only did 3, because there's a little bit of like nickel and diming and stuff that can happen. And for me, I just want to do what's best for the song. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that's not just a creative thing with the writing. It's also like the vibe and the mood. And I'm just not one of those people who wants to like have a fight over songwriting before you even write the song or like right after. Like just get the song right.
Many bands have broken up over this.
Oh,
yes, case in point. So going back to another thing, so registering with PROs, but before that, because you got to have a song to register. So when we say song, it's a composition is the legal term for this,
right?
And you have to have a composition to register. So first you write something, then you got your split sheet. And I would say for split sheets, anything is better than nothing. So even just talking about it and having an oral agreement is better than not talking about it. But even better would be something in writing to memorialize it. Say even just an email saying, hey, great writing that song with you today. As discussed, here's the splits that we agreed on. It would be even better if you could say, hey, if you could reply back to me with a thumbs up or whatever, just to get that confirmation. But anything that can memorialize it, right? It doesn't have to be a fancy, like you could hire me and I could draft a split sheet for every song for you and it look very formal and but scope and scale, you don't need that, necessarily unless you want to have that level of formality.
Okay. That's good to know. You don't need to spend a lot of money to do these things.
Definitely not. And I mean, what you can also find resources online, but what I recommend is, having like a form, so like you've got your standard go-to split sheet that you're always just sort of having people, work from. And I've actually found that is also like a way to be collaborative and sort of bond if you do it the right way, because creating should be like a fun and engaging process. And of course it's not always, because it's difficult, but having these like systems in place is what I have found to at least make the legal side not like a roadblock. Like it's just part of the process, and usually everyone respects that if you approach it the right way.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so that's pretty easy to do the split sheet. Even just an email potentially could work. But okay, and then you mentioned, okay, this is the composition, but then there's the recording, right? Could you break down a little bit of that, like difference between those two things and the flow of licenses and royalties.
Absolutely. So what you just touched on are the two copyrights that as a music attorney I deal with every day. And even if you didn't know it, if you're a recording and a performing artist, you deal with these same things every day too, because you've got two basic concepts that govern all of music law. So on one side, we've already talked a little bit about compositions, and there's the composition copyright called the work of performing arts, and that's with the U.S. Copyright Office, and of course there's foreign copyrights too, kind of outside the scope of our conversation today, but they all work the same way. And the copyright for the composition is the copyright for the song itself. So if you go and write a song and then you put it in a tangible medium, like you're writing down lyrics or you record it, but I don't want to confuse that, so I'm going to leave that out of my example, but you've got a song that you've written, you can hum it, and then you write the chords down on a tab or whatever, you've created something. You're able to register the composition copyright for that. The PA is what we call it for short.
So is it necessary to formally copyright your song through the
yeah, if you want to exploit it, and exploit is a fancy legal term for making money, so absolutely you do want to register the composition copyright as soon as you've got that composition. And
what's the process look like on that?
It's relatively easy. You can do it online. I believe the website is copyright.gov. And what's great about that is they've got incredible resources to literally hold your hand. So once again, I'm not trying to talk people out of hiring me today, but like literally, you do not need to hire a lawyer to register copyright. There's like step-by-step instructions, even videos right there on like how to do these things. And it's pretty straightforward. You just go in, you hit start an application, you go through it, it gives you all the prompts, and there's a lot of nuances. And if it's complicated, that is like maybe when you'd bring in an attorney, to help guide you through that. Or but again, it's really easy. You can do it online.
Okay.
And all you need is some, sort of specimen to show them, like if you got the lyric sheet, and, a recording sometimes will work, but just something that will show them what the song is. You're able to do that.
Okay. So, there's some fee associated with this too, though?
It depends on what you're doing, but it's around $80.
Okay. So,
and you can, depending on the situation too, you can sometimes do more than one song at a time.
Okay.
So that's for the composition.
Okay.
And just to sort of recap too, because I think when artists are first sort of understanding this, there's a lot. So just to short recap, compositions dealing with songwriters, just like the PROs and the split sheets, we all haven't even talked about the other side of things, which is the recordings themselves, also known as the masters or sound recordings. So just to recap, PROs, you're dealing with songwriters, right? So you've got the composition, that's the copyright that songwriters typically hold, or songwriters are represented by publishers, and publishers are usually the people who deal with the composition copyrights. They might have the administration rights to, that's the ability to say yes and no to placements and other things. And their job as a publisher is to exploit the compositions. So I think maybe that's a good segue now to talk about, record labels and the sound recordings, is that, they're comparable on the sound recording side, which is the recording themselves. So sound recordings, just like we talked about, compositions are when you write a song, when you record a song, now you've created a totally separate copyright, and that's the sound recording. A lot of times these are referred to like as masters, the master recording, and it's sort of the same process to register a copyright, but you got to understand what it is first. So, again, I said when you write a song and then you record it, you've got that composition in a tangible medium, but you've also created something that you can hold in your hand, that actual recording. So at the time of recording the song, you've got that version of it. And, here, one of the things I love about your studio, Roy, is you have a tape machine. So this is great and I've used it actually multiple times for a lot of different projects that we've done.
One of the few.
Yeah. So no, and that's why I love your studio, man. You're kind of like the go-to for me here when I'm located in San Diego.
Appreciate
it. But point being is, when you take that composition and you record it onto Roy's tape machine over here, you've now created something you can hold in your hand, that it's an iteration of that composition at a given moment in time, that you have everyone that's created this amazing recording. That's the masters. Okay. That is the sound recording copyright. Typically the sound recording copyright, you've got a label that helps, represent, just like the publishers, the person who represents the songwriters that have created the compositions, the record label, or if you're independent, it's also you just registering the sound recording copyright. But that's the side for whoever represents the performing artists who have recorded the composition into, like, again, a tangible medium like the tape machine here.
But a hard drive suffices.
Oh,
as well.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, speaking, you can hear sort of the, in my voice, of course. Yeah, the hard drive is the most common now, for sure. And it usually ends up back on a hard drive either way,
Yes, true.
even if it's just consumers.
Yeah.
So for sure. But it's really important that, artists understand the difference, because we're in like the very basics. And I talked about the team, and if we have time, we can talk more about like creating a team later. But it is important, I think, for every artist, whether you're a composer, a recording artist, doesn't matter. You should have a basic understanding of the fundamentals. And the two copyrights that get us paid as creators in music are really important to understand the differences. And pretty much all the other revenue streams and like all the things that you thought we might talk about today, you got to understand the difference between the sound recording and the composition, or it doesn't work, and it'll make sense.
With most of our audience probably being independent artists, I'm curious about the publisher part. Like, they probably don't have a publisher. Are they then the default publisher, or how does it work?
Yeah, so it depends. And right, so starting out, just like a record label, you don't just declare yourself, signed. You got to find a publisher, and although that's how I got started. Whole other story way back in the day. But yeah, you essentially can register as a publisher with your PRO yourself. So you're able to collect, certain publisher shares that otherwise you would not be able to collect. So I think that's, if you're going to be in the business of releasing your own compositions, that's something that's worth doing right away too. And there's a lot of resources online. So for example, if you go with ASCAP as a writer, you can go online and research like, okay, what is a publisher? Just like I kind of touched on before, and what their job, again, just like a PRO is, they collect monies. A publisher's job is to make money for your composition. So the issue with that is, becoming a publisher, other than registering it so you can collect everything a publisher can collect, there's not a huge advantage, because it's just like starting your own record label. So you got to want to do that. And it's its own beast in itself. So
you actually have to have like a legitimate business of some kind if you're going to claim this publisher.
Legitimate is like kind of, there's gray areas, but no, what you need to do is declare yourself a publisher. You probably get a DBA if you want to be able to, cash checks in that name, and most importantly, register your publisher with, at least the two big PROs, or if you're only going to represent yourself, you only need to, sign up with the publisher that, you sign up your publisher with the PRO that you're with. So like if I'm with BMI and I don't plan on signing other artists at ASCAP, I just need to register my publishing entity with just BMI.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So, okay. Sorry I've interrupted, but that's
great,
kind of just in the back of my mind of like, most people are just independent, so they don't have a label, they don't have a publisher.
Yeah. And you know what? I hear, let me just take it a step further.
Yeah.
So, since you touched on a really important subject. So for example, I work for Pacific Records.
Yeah.
They also have a publishing division. So the original artists that are creating original compositions on the label, they have the opportunity, if we work out a deal with them, to work with us on the publishing side too. And we work with a variety of diverse artists, and all the, ASCAP and BMI are the most common ones. So Pacific Records, we have publishing entities registered with both BMI and ASCAP. So we're able to represent both BMI and ASCAP writers. So again, it depends on like your situation and what you're trying to do. And, all the majors have their own publishing entities that they work with too. Most independent labels do as well.
Okay. But then a completely independent person who's not with the label, what do they do, I guess?
Yeah, no, I would say if you're, there's a couple things. First of all, there are different companies out there that can go out and you can kind of hire to collect your royalties if you're independent and don't want to be a publisher.
Okay.
You can look those up. The name, I don't know if you can help me here. There's a couple big ones and the names are escaping me right now. Something sound royalties maybe, or there's you know what I'm talking about. And I should know this. It's just you're my first appointment in the morning. So.
Yeah.
All good.
But there's a bunch of different companies you can hire, or again, as at a minimum, you can still register as a publisher with whatever the PRO that you're signed up is.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So carrying on from there, you have your composition, you have your master recording. These are two separate things, and how does that end up affecting then down the line? The royalty payments that you would get from streaming or other things. how's that break down?
Yeah, so it's actually pretty complex and probably outside the scope. Like I did a whole installment on what an artist gets per stream for my music and law column that I write, and even that a little bit after I wrote it became dated, and it's a little bit of a changing thing because the streaming platforms in general they work based on like aggregates. So like if you have X number of consumers that have listened to streams and that's the total number, then it gets divided based on like the record label share and calculated. So it is somewhat complicated and further complicated by the fact that it actually depends for the streaming services on what type of listener that actually did the listening. So there's two main kinds. There's subscribers and there's paid like commercial, they get commercials.
They paid for the service.
Right. They paid for the service. Well, right. The subscribers are the ones who paid.
Yeah, sorry.
And then there's the non-paying
tier,
ones. Yeah, that are free. And so the ad-based is what I was getting at. And the ad-based listeners, the artists get much less per stream than the subscribers. But depending on the platform, there's a lot less subscribers. So Spotify is usually the biggest example. They have a lot more ad-based listeners than subscribers, so they don't pay as well as say Apple Music. That's a majority are subscription based.
Right.
So it depends, but streaming across the board, I can say there's actually you get royalties for both. So that's why if you don't register with on the composition side, have a publisher, right, you're actually missing out on some of the royalties. For the composition, it's actually a lot less significant. So most of your streaming revenue is actually on the sound recording master side, but there is a portion that actually does go to the composition. So that's just another reason you want to have all your ducks in a row there for sure. And again, the streaming, it's just it's complex, but you can understand that and there's certain metrics too. So like 1,500 streams equals one single sale. There's all for RIAA purposes. So there's like systems in place for this.
Yeah, we don't need to get into all that. But
let me ask you: if a client or an artist goes to CD Baby, does CD Baby then take care of all of that?
So for example, CD Baby is an example of a consumer distributor that if you opt in for like their publishing side of things, they will collect all of these monies for you. So perfect example of like a one-stop. And I think most of the consumer distributors like DistroKid, TuneCore, they all have similar services. But two things I'll kind of comment on with that. First of all, you got to know what you're opting in for and not, because the starting point for these services is just what a record label would do on the distribution side, or a distributor, which is just getting your sound recording distributed and obtaining the proper licenses with each individual digital service provider. So like the DSPs like Spotify, Apple Music. So in your CD Baby example, you'd want to make sure if you're independent and want your publishing royalties collected, that you opt in for whatever they call their publishing service. And I'm not sure what they call it, but they for sure have it. I've seen it before. And exactly, that's how you get covered as an indie artist, is you sign up for all of those things. And I would also say, read the fine print in the terms and make sure you're not like locked in, because all of these will have, like it might be, and this is an example, I have no idea what it actually is, but they might require like a year that you stick with them. And if CD Baby or whatever other company is locking you up with your publishing for a year, just make sure you understand that. And that may prohibit you from entering a deal with a publisher, really, really soon, until you're out of the term where you have to ask CD Baby, which could be problematic. So, but yes, definitely having a company collecting is better than not collecting, for sure.
I see. So if you're not going to make your own publishing company, you can theoretically have it
collected. For sure.
They must take some sort of cut of this though, right?
Oh, of course. And the fees vary significantly. And what I tell artists is, okay, well, do you want 100% of nothing, or do you want to have someone actually making you money and then get a piece for it? So of course it's all scope and scale dependent. But yes, that's a good point. They all charge. Sometimes there's like monthly fees, sometimes it's a percentage, sometimes it's both. So, again, it's important you understand what you're getting into, but also it's a scope and scale thing. And what I mean by that is, what do you want to be spending your time on? Because, as an artist, and depending on if you're a composer or a recording artist, or maybe you're both, just what you do day to day is really important. And, I always say that as a creator first myself, I want to be focusing as much as possible on the creating side.
Absolutely,
because, it's in this day and age, it's so hard to even break through. And, having your music be as good as it can be and the best it can be is paramount over everything else. So if you can delegate something or not, worry about a certain aspect of it, it's okay to maybe make a little less But, in the long run, you'll probably come out ahead anyways. You know, so.
Yeah.
And now, a word from our sponsor, Rarefied Recording. Oh, that's me. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my studio, Rarefied Recording, and the services I offer there. The studio itself was built from the ground up, from the masterful plans of Mr. Wes Lachaux, so it sounds fantastic both in the control room and the live room. A 32-channel Neve Genesis console holds center court and is complemented by a wide array of outboard gear, instruments, and microphones. Your music will be in good company. If you live in the San Diego area, just head on over to rarefiedrecording.com to learn more and book a tour. If you aren't lucky enough to live in San Diego, you can also hear examples of my mixing work. That's RAREFIED recording.com. And now back to the episode. Yeah, do you have any thoughts about those different, I would call them aggregators, I guess, DistroKid, TuneCore, CD Baby?
Yeah, I mean, I can weigh in only based on personal experience, of course, and I don't have any like affiliation or, like I'm not getting paid to say anything, but I had a label relationship with CD Baby for a long time that was pretty solid on the distribution side. They were great. I've had clients and artists I've worked with that say good things about DistroKid, so those are the two I would say most common that I see. The label that I work for now, we're distributed by The Orchard through Burnside Distribution. And they're a division of Sony. They're great.
Yeah, I've heard really good things.
Yeah, having just someone to talk to is a big deal for us. And that's an example of why you might want to go with a label if you have that opportunity, because it's the reach and the ability to be able to just like, at 3 a.m, call your distributor and say, hey, it dropped, but oh my God, they got the artist tag wrong, or something like that. And otherwise you might be waiting 2 weeks just to have a different consumer get back to you. And
I've heard about that.
You gotta resubmit it, man.
It's really hard to get in touch with a person through some of these companies.
I know, and I'm sure with AI and everything now, it's only getting worse. I'm sure. I'm not even sure what I'm talking to a human half the time. That's why if I know the person, it's like, okay, I actually have a human on the other end.
Right.
So for sure. But great question.
Yeah. I was going to ask about Bandcamp. What do you think about Bandcamp? Because that's another of other place to release music. That's a little different. Yeah,
they're great. And, you might know more about Bandcamp than I do, but I know we have a profile for the label, and they're pretty artist friendly from what I hear and very transparent about the fees and just getting stuff up there. And I do know even of some artists who, for example, they'll only put their stuff on Bandcamp and won't even distribute it through the DSPs like Spotify and Apple Music. And that's a thing. And I think it just depends on what you're trying to do as an artist. And I've heard very good things about Bandcamp.
Is that the one where you can pay what you want?
Sometimes I've seen that option.
Yeah, I think so. And there's a lot of services. So like Bandzoogle is another one that does websites, and you can put all your materials through them too. And you can do a pay, you can set up the album so it can be like pay what you want, or they can set up incentives and a mailing list. So
usually when I've seen at Bandcamp, it's like there's like a minimum price, but you can feel free to pay more.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I like that. Very cool.
That's good. Yeah, and they do a thing sometimes on Fridays where all the money goes to the artists. So yeah, just curious also as you work with the label, running label and all that, the streaming stuff for a lot of independents just doesn't really translate to much. Do you think there might be strategies where you hold off on the streaming and maybe do physical,
Oh, great question. And that's actually something that we do at the label I work for, Pacific, as best practice. And this, again, it's going to be really dependent on individual situations here, because I think certain approaches work better in different genres and even like the size of the band and everything. But there is definitely a trend, especially in the indie world, to go to physical product first and roll out, whatever your digital is going to be after. And we do that quite a bit at our label, just because it creates the demand. And also I'm just personally really big on tangible products still. So I just love vinyl, even cassettes kind of coming back, and go to CD when we can too, because you can hold it in your hand, and then you got that core group of followers who are going to purchase it. And then differentiation is also the other, and a really important tool that, and again, this is nothing new. They've been doing this forever, but like having exclusives, like a bonus track that's only on the vinyl, or, and even the big players do this with like Target. You might only be able to get like through Target the extra bonus track for Taylor Swift or whatever it is, so again, the physical, differentiation, and then with your timing of a release, definitely that's a great question. And
yeah, it seems
you see it often, and it works. It does.
Seems like that makes some sense, because it's like, you have like maybe some core fans, right, who do want your stuff. Now, if you immediately put it on streaming, it's going to de-incentivize them to go out and purchase something where you're going to make a lot more money probably off that.
Right, exactly.
They're
That's
gonna,
the thought process.
Yeah, they're going to be like, oh, well, here it is on Spotify or whatever. But if it's like, oh no, it's only on vinyl right now, well, you know, if you really like the band, you're going to get it.
Yeah,
probably.
exactly. Right. Yep. And then same thing for a physical product at shows too. That's the other thing. Touring, you know, people still purchase vinyl, and you know, there's a lot of merchandise that goes through touring as well.
Yeah, that's good. If you're a big live band, I would think that the merchandise and
merch at the
selling CDs and all that vinyl.
Yeah. What do you think about running a label in 2026? What does a label do for artists right now?
Yeah, no,
compared to before?
Great question. Yeah. I mean, actually, I can even go back because there was a couple things that if we were talking about like preparation for studio, and, you know, I want to touch on this, but in the context of labels. So a label and a publisher to an extent too, they handle a lot of the business side of recordings. And, you know, a couple things that we didn't talk about yet that I just wanted to briefly touch on is even just the types of agreements that you might want to have people, you know, sign when you're in the studio or beforehand.
Okay.
I had mentioned the 2 copyrights, right? You got the sound recording and the work of performing arts for the composition.
Yeah.
And typically, unless you know, you're all equal and you've got a band or artist who are sharing in those copyrights, there might be one entity or like the band leader or the artist who owns those copyrights. And in order to register them, if you have other contributors, so the easiest example is we're here in this studio today at Rarefied, and you've got like a guitar player that you hired and you have a bassist, and they're just studio musicians, and let's just say they're not even in the band, and they're, you know, hired guns basically, where you're paying them a flat fee and they're just awesome musicians and they're going to make your record better. Yeah. Those situations are typically called work for hires, and they're not going to expect or want any kind of, you know, ownership in the copyright that they're creating because you're paying them for the privilege.
That's how it should be, at least.
Right. Well, right. Yeah. Well, right. So that is why you want to have at a minimum these types of, you know, performers that are recording with you have, you know, sign what's called a work for hire agreement. And these can be very simple one-page things that say, hey, I paid you X, has some language in there that's important to make sure that you're clearing it so they do not own any of the underlying copyright that they're creating, that they're contributing to.
Right.
And now you've got that work for hire signed, and you can register the copyright without worry of them coming back when you hit it big and sell 1 million records and they want their equal share because you didn't have anything in writing.
Yeah. Hey, I wrote that bass line.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's another reason you want to split sheet, all those other things. So you can make it clear that they did not make, and the buzzword is a creative contribution, or if they did, they sold it to you.
Yep.
Right. You paid them.
That's what a work for hire is all about.
Right.
And, you know, just in the same vein too, you've got the work for hires. If you have a producer, you probably want a producer agreement too. And, you know, it varies, but typically the producer is only going to get points. They're not going to own any of the masters either.
A point is what, just the audience?
A percentage. Yeah. A point just means like a percent. And actually, depending on what the percentage is, it can be of net, of gross. And, you know, the net is like after expenses. Gross is just like dollar comes in. It's a percentage of that. So again, everything's negotiable. But just flagging these issues so you know about it. And this was all spawned by your questions like, what does a record label do?
Yeah.
So if you're working with a record label and you're going into a studio, they're going to be handling these issues for you. So it's one less thing to worry about. And I think in any business, but especially the music business, it's so important to know what you don't know. And, you know, assembling the team is part of how you do that. You know, you got to find people you trust to sort of help walk you through this. And that's label, publisher. That's, you know, if they're the right one and the right fit, that's exactly what they do. So again, just wanted to touch on those two, the work for hires and, you know, producer agreements is most common after split sheets.
Right. Do you find that an engineer who's not producing also should probably have a work for hire type thing?
Yeah. You know, like I know Chris Hobson I've worked with in the studio many a time, and I always have him sign the work for hires, even though, and again, I love that guy. I've been working with him for over 20 years. But again, it's just it's just a normal thing, you know.
Yeah, formality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that would be smart. Yeah, just cover your bases in case something does blow up, and you don't want someone coming around being like, hey, I actually am entitled to such and such. You know?
Yeah, and what I said before is about, you know, having something in writing is better than nothing, and the formalities of it. It's true for, you know, the work for hire or a producer agreement too. And the other interesting thing is I've worked with some really big people who just do things on a handshake. And when I'm working with people like that, I still try to at least like, okay, here's the email, say this is what you said, so trying to document it somehow. But I'm trying to say, if you're afraid of like a long document, that's not what we're talking about here. It's anything's better than nothing. And in writing is sort of the minimum starting point, I would say. And a writing can just mean an email or a piece of paper or anything.
Yeah, if it's got that chain that can be looked at later as proof that, hey, we discussed this.
Yeah, exactly. So I think your question was labels, right? So that's just one
that's
thing.
one thing.
I mean, so
what else?
Generally, depending on, so I'll use the label I work for as an example. Yeah. We work with like artists in varying stages of their careers, but also in like the development of their albums. And it actually depends greatly on like what we're doing. So first, for example, is the artist going to be creating an album with us? And are we coming to a place like this at Rarefied to track the album? Or is this just a delivery and distribution deal where they got the album all polished and ready to go? They just want us to provide label services. So a lot of what we've talked about so far would be in the situation where it's an artist that's developing their record and recording the record with us. Because most of at least the starting point for both copyrights would start there, and we would just help navigate and potentially pay for it. Because another thing labels do is they will pay for or provide the ability to record for an artist, or sometimes give an advance.
Yeah, that would be the typical old way of doing things. The advance, paying for all this recording time, and then,
which is less and less every day. So it's more atypical. Like we used to have a studio, we don't do that anymore. So it just depends on like the label and the situation. Or in the majors, again, they're giving advances and taking care of the album. But regardless of where they are, once the album is delivered, there's a certain set of services that the label sort of lines up and orchestrates the campaign for. So, number one is distribution. So the labels can either self-distribute or they're distributed through third-party distributors. There's a lot that even just goes into that. And since you asked, and this is something that just makes me happy every time I say it, there is like a lot of lead time that goes in from when I receive a record and artwork, submit it into the dashboard from our distributor, and hit the send button that I need to even do my job. So one of the most difficult things, and what I try to educate artists on the most when I'm working with them in a label relationship, is that I know you're excited to get your album out tomorrow, but if you want to do it right, I need 60 to 90 days from when I hit that submit button to line up everything. So taking an opportunity to talk about what am I lining up? I think that's important. So
what is entailed in these 60 to 90 days that you're doing?
So there, first, on the retail side for like digital and DSPs, for example, it used to be a lot more like physical, like, oh, I want my like album displayed in this record store in a certain place. That's how it was in the old days. But now it's digital streaming, right? So it's a relationship with Spotify. It's pitching with enough time to get on a curated, playlist from Spotify. So there's pitches that can be made both from internal, like with your distributor. There's the pitches that anyone can do from the artist dashboard. Like for example, in Spotify or Apple Music, there's ways to pitch ahead of time. And I'll give a micro example. So now with Spotify, for example, you have to at least 7 days ahead of time submit to be able to be featured on what's called the release radar. So that's when an email goes out to all of your followers saying, hey, we've got this new release out on your release day. And if you don't at least do that 7 days ahead of time and take care of that pitch, you're not even in the running for that.
Wow.
So again, there's the getting, Spotify ads lined up, gaining interest. All that's the retail side. Then there's radio promotion. So typically, assuming you got the budget or want to do it DIY, you want to be able to send your songs to radio and your album ahead of time to try to generate interest. And radio is still very relevant, and especially its genres, some genres it's more important than others, but also the entry to radio too. There's companies like Play MPE that are out there that like, they start at like $250 to get your music to radio stations. So it's not like prohibitively expensive necessarily. There's also like the publicity aspect of it. So typically you'd want to hire a publicist that's like in the genre used to working, whatever it is, the release that you're working on. So they can handle like getting press, media inquiries, generating press releases to send out. Things of that nature. Then ideally you want this artist to be touring and on the road. So connecting them with an agent or giving them showcase opportunities or any kind of live performances around when the, marketing campaign is going to start.
Would you help them book a tour? That kind of
So labels, and there's exceptions, but typically labels and agencies are separate. In California, you got to have a license, and like you're a talent agent. So what we do, because we're not a talent agency at Pacific, is we'll have showcase events. So we're the promoter, not the agent. But like we had one in July last year at Kate Sessions Park, where we had like 5 of our top artists that were sort of active in their album cycles that year do a quick showcase. So providing those types of opportunities, definitely. And even more importantly, if the artist has reached a certain level, getting them an agent, because an agent, going back to the team conversation, that's a really important aspect of this. So you've got, all of these things that we've talked about so far. It's the label who's sort of orchestrating and working with these different team members to create, what I say like is the most momentum you can possibly have when that album drops. And then just like I said, there's a 3 to 6 month campaign before the album drops. Ideally, there's a 3 to 6 month campaign after too. So that's called the album cycle, or like the life of the album.
Right.
And your job is to move as many units or have as many streams as possible in that time with some of the players that I've touched on here, with like the, having a publicist or publicity campaign, having a radio promoter, working with your distributor to make retail pitches, having the artist on tour or getting them with an agent. And to speak on touring for a minute too, I can say as an emerging artist, so, if you don't have enough fans to like pack the belly up or some other local venue yet, one of the best ways to do this is to get support slots. And the way you do this is you make friends. And this is something
you got to get out there.
Yeah. And this is something only the artists can really do.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things. So, and things have changed, I think, even in the last 10 years of building a following and things like that. But the old age, thing of just like being nice to people and like talking to people and putting yourself out there and taking risks, that hasn't changed. So I think, making friends, and then that support slot, if it works out and organically happens, one day might, morph into actually like, hey, you want to come on tour with me? And then their agent sees you, and now that's how you get your own tour, is and that we work at the sports arena. We book a 340 capacity venue there, and every year since we've been working there in 2011, or it's been a while, we always saw it was like I think we saw Ed Sheeran open for Taylor Swift or something, like, and I'm dating myself, I don't remember when it was, a long time ago. And then 3 years later, there's Ed, like headlining. So I mean, it works on that in the like major, but also on a small level too. It's just support slots are probably, of all of this, I would say the most critical, but also the most hard to get, because it's really dependent on the opportunities that the artist has around them.
Yeah, man, there's so much to do.
There's so much, and I'm just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
I could have talked to you for half an hour just about the Spotify royalty and breaking that down. I gave, in addition to my music and law installment on that, I have like a little PowerPoint presentation when I talk about it. But yeah, there's so much, but not to be intimidated, because going back to like what to do as an artist. You want to build the team, and until you build the team, you're kind of you are the team.
That's exactly that's kind of thinking in my head, is like a lot of people are independent and they don't have the team, and they're trying to do all these things and they don't even know what they should be doing. And sometimes they know some of the steps and they're trying to do all these things, and really they just want to make music.
Right. Yeah,
and I guess
you should focus on that.
This is why a label maybe does still make sense. Although I would caution, I think there's a lot of labels out there who are just kind of a name. And
totally.
It's not very seriously done, where they're actually doing these kind of things for you. Great
question. Yeah, and I actually want to touch on this too, because I my first question to any artist is, do you really even need a label? And I mean, think about who's saying that, right? I'm the CEO of a record label, and I'm saying this, and it's true, because, and there's two things about this. It's all like dependent on the situation. So I'm generalizing here, but there are a lot of labels that can't do anything for certain artists, because it's like, take the 3 majors left, for example. There's not a lot they can do for like an artist that's just starting out, even if they put them through their system necessarily. And just like you said, there are some imprint brands that are nothing more than a name. So, and the other thing that we really didn't touch on at all, I'm not even sure we'll have time, is like, part of why I say, do you really need a label, is the rights that they take in exchange for these services, and whether or not you can do it yourself. So one team member we haven't touched on at all that I think is important is an artist manager. And artist managers can really help you in the beginning. And you don't even necessarily need an industry manager who like manages the biggest artist in your genre. And in fact, sometimes even if you can get that, it's not a good thing because all they care about is their one big star. So, you know, having like someone young with a business mind, or maybe more of a business mind than you, and the time to devote to help manage your career is another thing that just really sets certain artists apart, you know, and even, you know, if they're young and have parents that are supportive, even that, you know, like having the family help support their music career, because it takes a village to, you know, launch an artist, and surrounding yourself with the right people, I think, is the difference between success and failure.
Yeah. I mean, I bet there's a lot of young people who've gone to a school and learned about the music business. There's some sort of entertainment, you know, bachelor of whatever. Those might be the kind of people that you could find and be like, hey, maybe you can help me grow this thing.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they want the experience, and yeah.
Because as a creator, I mean, you don't want to lose sight of that too. Your job is to create the best, you know, whatever music or whatever you're creating as possible. And all of these things are sort of competing interests with that, you know, because there are a lot of them are time intensive, and that's why you got to, again, strike that balance between how much time you're creating to your, you know, spending to your craft, and then managing the business side, and anything that you can delegate to someone who's competent and willing to help. And again, eventually you know, artists aren't, you know, they expect to be paid, like all the team members we're talking about here. But when you're up and coming, you know, just having someone who believes in you, you know, that's what's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's the social media side of things.
Yeah, of course.
That's
So
huge these days.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
So that's another category of like what a label will help orchestrate. And typically that would be like either via a social media manager, whether it's on the label or hiring someone. And, you know, that's another important thing that you want kind of firing on all cylinders during the time of release. So social media is very important. And I forget where I read this statistic too, probably in Billboard magazine, but don't quote me on that. But TikTok viral songs is like the number one way to predict translation to Billboard charts. Wow. So like social media is more relevant than ever, like it or hate it. And that's another thing I can say, even I struggle with, is, you know, it's so time consuming, and I would also just say emotionally exhausting unless you have like a certain like character trait,
right.
you know, that some people it's really easy for. And I'm jealous of that, because for me it's forced, and I'm always like, oh, it's not good enough. It's not good enough.
Right.
But then like you're supposed to have like 3 posts a day. So which one is it? You know?
Right.
So having a team that can help just like tell you like, no, it's okay, like this is good, that's important, but also to help, like, once you've got that content, a social media manager can package it for the correct platform and then make the posts. Because another thing that I struggle with at the label is I need content. So even if I've got a social media manager, I can't be the one like shooting the video of me recording the song if I'm not there. So like, you got to give me something to work with. So again, that's something that it's very artist specific and dependent on, but it's so important. So if you're not good at it, acknowledge that and get someone to help you who is, you know, that's what I would say.
Get the team.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's all about. Get the team.
Yeah, you got to grow this team around you.
Yes.
If you're really going to go for this, sounds like. And then, you know, social media is a lot of short form video, but there was always the music video was a big deal at one point. Is it still kind of a thing?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, you can even, Spotify just started distributing like proper videos. So like, you know, you can actually distribute your music videos to Spotify and Apple Music now. Apple Music has had it for a while, even with iTunes, but they're all catching on to that now. And then another important part I didn't mention from the label, you just triggered me on that too, is the sync department, and you know, syncing your music and television and films. And I would say, and also speaking from experience and success that I've personally gone through, that's actually one of the most meaningful ways, if you don't have a big major label budget, to kind of get discovered as an artist. And I speaking from experience, I've had placements from an album I released like 3 years ago that we just pitched and got lucky, you know, and made the right kind of pitch, and that put that particular artist on the map. And you know, they just from that they had over 100,000 monthly Spotify listeners and everything. So sync, and to back up, by the way, what I'm talking about here is placing your music that you create, original music, in either, or it could be a cover, I suppose, in either a film or television show. And typically these can be very lucrative. So like in the situation that I gave an example of, there was like an upfront payment and you're getting back end royalties and people are discovering you. So it's like, it hits on all the marks. And there's various ways that you can pitch your music. And this works for both songwriters and the recording artists, so the 2 copyrights, because in a sync clearance, you actually need both 100% of the people who administer or own the composition and the master to agree to a sync. Otherwise you can't do it. So in the industry, we call, when you have like a group that owns all those rights in one place, it's called one stop. So if you're one stop, you're able to say yes or no to that placement without checking with all the songwriters and publishers and all that. But I mention this because sync in general, it depends on like what you're trying to do and who you're talking to. And there are sync libraries. Like, so back to our CD Baby example, you can like opt into their sync library, I think they call it, or something, where you're part of everyone else who logs into their sync library, and maybe you'll get a bite, but that's typically not the best way to do it. And what I recommend is either doing it yourself. Like, you can go to IMDb and find out who every music supervisor to every show you can think of under the sun or film, and reach out to them. You know, typically a show needs to be in development at the time of the pitch. So like, in other words, if the show's already sent to the distributor and it's going on Netflix tomorrow, you're too late. But otherwise, making direct pitches and making sure that like you know what they want, doing your research ahead of time is good, or getting a sync agent. So there are people who...
We have a whole episode about sync.
Oh, good. Okay.
Season 2, episode 8.
Okay.
Prepping for Sync with Richard Carrasco.
Excellent.
Go back and listen to that if you want to know more.
That, but what I will say, that's another thing that a label can do, is help you with sync relationships. Because I can say some of the best value that I've been able to provide my artists is because we know how to make a great pitch. We've got great relationships in the sync department, and I can like show examples of that to the artists who ask me those questions.
That's
so
cool.
Sync is very important. And again, a way to get yourself out there without, I mean, there's no pay to play in sync really. And if it is, it's not, I highly recommend not doing that, because it's not the real thing.
It tends to be one of the best ways to make money.
Exactly. Yeah. You're right. So go check out that podcast. But yeah, that's another thing that a label will help is pitching to film and television.
Right on. Yeah.
Great question.
That's important these days.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a lot of what I wanted to ask you about. Brian, is there anything else? Burning question.
Yeah, you covered a lot, which is really awesome.
Yeah. There's so much.
And, I know. We could spend a lot more.
I guess one thing to say is don't be intimidated, because I have found that while all of this may appear overwhelming, kind of the more you do it, the more just like it is what it is.
Pieces fall in place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I would also say that the good news about the age that we're living in, it's never been easier to create and distribute music. So
That's true.
It used to be where the labels held the keys to big, nice studios.
Gatekeepers,
and, exactly. And now, you can make a great recording from, your basement or your garage or whatever. So really just, this kind of knowledge gives you an edge, and, surrounding yourself with the right people and having a long game is, people are rewarded in this business. So again, going back to like, if we're kind of putting a finishing cap on this, be optimistic, because we're talking about tools here to further your career, but be in it for the long run, because
important.
Yeah, it's so important. And there's, and same going back to the relationships, like I was talking about making friends to get on tour, that goes like across the board for everything. Like I can tell you, I work a lot in Los Angeles, and everybody knows, it's such a small community, man. Everybody knows everyone. So if you treat someone poorly, or it's not just a reputational thing, but you're probably going to have to work with that same person again, and it's not going to be the result you wanted. So think long term in this business in general, because like I said, while there is a lot, if you just believe in what you're doing, and like in your gut what you're doing is right, it's just a matter of time, and keep learning, don't give up. And just like I said, don't just be nice. Treat
I remember hearing that when I started out. He said, as soon as you're mean to somebody, they're going to turn around and be the guy that can hire you on something.
Exactly. Right. No, and that's
down the road.
Totally true. I've seen it. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No, hey, it's just good advice for life in general.
Yeah, I agree. Sure. Not just music.
Yeah.
This has been enlightening. I like the idea of kind of the team.
Yep.
And taking that long approach, not trying to necessarily do everything yourself, and finding some people that can help you along the way, and slowly kind of build this thing, because it is a lot. Like whenever I sit down to think about these things, I'm like, wow, there's just so much to this. And I'm overwhelmed as someone who's, in the business, I guess you could say, but I'm just like, I just need to stick to my lane, because it's like, people ask me, oh, Roy, what do you think about this? I'm like, I don't know, man.
Well, no, I don't know is like the best answer ever, man. And that's why I was saying, that you just touched on some really important points that I was talking about earlier
Yeah.
too. I mean, I can maybe hold my own on a board over there, but I'm not trying to do all that stuff myself either. It's one of those things where you got to kind of choose what your expertise is going to be in as a creator and what you want to delegate. And know that you can't do it all. And if you're doing it all now, that's okay. But like the goal is not to always do it all. The goal is to like sit back and relax and just create one day if you're successful. So striving for that goal and knowing what you don't know and being okay letting go of things.
Yeah.
Obviously
it takes time.
Yeah, of course.
You're building the plane as you fly it.
Yep, exactly.
And, that's just the way it is. But if you're serious about your music and you want to see it maybe be your full-time thing or your half-time thing, I think that just takes that kind of commitment to chip away at it. And
agreed.
Yeah.
If people want to get in touch with you, Brian, what's the best way?
Yeah, great question. I mean, you can just go to my website. It's brianwitkin.com. So
Okay.
BrianWitkin.com. And you can find out all about me, read a little bit more about my record company, and even shoot me an email if you like.
There you go. Thanks again for coming on.
Awesome.
Thanks to everyone listening out there. And we will catch you on the next one.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Thank
All
you.
right, take care.
Bye.
That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for listening to Prepping for the Studio. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to your podcast from. And don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends. Episode info and my ebook, A Musician's Guide to the Recording Studio, are available at preppingforthestudio.com. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out there. Prepping for the Studio was recorded and edited at Rarefied Recording by me, Roy Silverstein. Theme music written by myself and Ariel Levine, performed and recorded by Ariel Levine. Many thanks to my co-host Brian Scheuble and you. Best of luck to you and your musical endeavors. And remember, as Alexander Graham Bell once said, before anything else, preparation is the key to success. We'll see you next time.